Although during the period of 600 to 1450, European states were experiencing the Dark Ages due to the disease known as the Black Death, the rest of the world was flourishing through the expansion and formation of new trading networks. Due to the growth of cities and population increase, states needed to use other products to feed their people. Along with products, ideas and religions were also shared between countries on these paths. The most famous of these networks was the Silk Road, which stretched from Eastern Europe to China, which was popularized by the well-known traveler Marco Polo. This route helped the spread of Christianity as well as the trade of products like grapes and silk. Another famous route in the European area was the Mediterranean Sea Trade. It connected the southern European states, such as Venice, to North Africa and the Byzantine Empire, which was located in present-day Turkey. New policies issued by the Byzantine Empire were allowed a more free spread of trade throughout its empire. The trans-Saharan trade route across the eastern, northern, and western states spread goods from the Kingdom of Mali to Egypt. Islam, a young new religion, spread throughout these states with the help of trans-Saharan exchange. Mansa Musa, a Mali king, traveled this route and helped the spread of Islam using newly domesticated camels. Another traveler known in this period was Ibn Battuta, who started in northeastern Africa and traveled to India and Europe. The Indian Ocean also had its own sea trade, connecting western Africa to Southeast Asia and China. Zhang He, a Chinese traveler, explored most of this route in the 15th century, allowing the Swahili people to open trade with the Asian people. This large dependence on trade led to the formation of mercantilism, which was a type of government that was centered around trade. Along this trade route, products such as ivory, rice, and lumber were traded along with the exchange of the ideas of Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Political, social, and economic influences also traveled along this route, mostly coming from China. The influence China had politically, socially, and economically on Japan, Korea, and other Asian states was called Sinification. These influences included religion and organization of government. Around 1100, the Christian Crusades began due to the Seljuk Turks who made it difficult for Christians from Europe to travel through the Middle East to their holy cities. These crusades, which lasted until the 15th century, slowed trade through the Middle East and Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman had been a huge part of the trade through the Mediterranean and Upper Africa, allowing people they conquered to trade freely. This was similar to the Mongols, who conquered most of Asia and allowed the trade between the people they conquered and the outside world, mostly through the Silk Road and Black Sea. Mesoamerica also began trade between its native people during this time period in which they traded weapons, food, and ideas. This period began to show the emergence of trade showing up all over the world. There were many new crops and planting methods that were introduced around the world. In the Americas, the Aztecs used the Chimpas system. There were many new developments too, such as the horse collar, the three-field system of crop rotation, and horseshoes. All of these helped increase the amount of food produced, which then increased the population. The export of products also increased. China produced ceramic pieces, porcelain, tableware, and silk. In Persia, ceramic goods were also produced, along with Persian rugs. India produced brass items, such as Buddhist religious art. All of these were exchanged through the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean trade route. Because of empires declining, cities also declined. Invaders came and took everything from the rich cities. This was problematic because cities were usually linked with a trade route. Invaders made the trade routes more dangerous and declined trade. Cities eventually got better because of new governments, military forces returning, which made trade routes safer, the global temperature rising, and crop rotation. One such example of the reviving of cities are the Tang and Song dynasties in China. They were beautiful and very advanced. Another good outcome was the revival of Venice, where Marco Polo was born. Marco Polo was an Italian merchant who traveled everywhere and recorded his travelings in a journal. Even though there were new planting methods around, serfs, free peasants, and slaves were still widely used for agricultural labor. A new kind of labor came around, coerced labor. It was just like slavery, except less brutal, and you could never really be freed. The Mita system in the Inca Empire was very similar to coerced labor. You had to do public works projects instead of work the land. Patriarchy was still a huge thing during this time period. Women weren't allowed to do much because men were still seen as superior. The only exception to this was, wait for it, the Mongols. Mongol women refused the Chinese tradition of foot binding. With the fall of the Roman Empire at the beginning of the post-classical era, Western Europe became every man for himself. With no unifying armies, laws, or education, the Christian church stayed intact. Most Western Europeans flocked to the church seeking faith, but the hierarchy in Rome provided social order and political stability. The people served as the organization of the Catholic Church. Change occurred as the era continued because of the hierarchy expanded with cardinals and archbishops. Secular leadership that existed in Western Europe at the beginning was local. Lords ran huge farms with serfs working the land. Knights protected their lord's land from attacks by rival lords, bandits, and Vikings. Over time, lords gained more land and power until a lord had enough power to declare himself king. Change occurred in Western Europe as political power began to shift to secular hands around 700 CE. It began when Charles Martel, a Christian leader of Germanic Franks, defeated the Muslims' army that had entered France from Spain in the Battle of Tours. This began a power struggle for political authority with Christian church leaders. New types of governments in the Western Europe, England, and France began. When the Roman Empire fell, the Byzantine Empire flourished. It was one of the most powerful empires that covered Eastern Europe. The greatest leader of the Byzantine Empire was Justinian. Byzantine merchants traded throughout the Mediterranean region, Black Sea, Red Sea, and Indian Ocean. The Byzantine Empire was in conflict with nearby Muslim caliphates. Muslim empire arose in Southwest Asia, North Africa, and Southeast Asia. Islam developed in Southwest Asia in the early 7th century. Muhammad, a merchant, preached monotheism and Arab unity. His visions and teachings were recorded in the Quran. The zakat was an economic factor that led many to convert to Islam. Islamic armies, missionaries, and merchants rapidly spread the faith east and westward. Islam had replaced Christianity as the dominant culture in North Africa and Spain. Dar al-Islam stretched from Spain and North Africa into India and Pakistan by the mid-18th century CE. Islam developed into Southwest Asia. While Western Europe was recovering, Spain became wealthy. Abbasids lost power and was ultimately destroyed by the Mongols. The Crusades were a series of Muslim-Christian clashes over control of Southeast Asia in the late 11th century. Christians looked to re-establish their faith in Southwest Asia. Byzantine Empire wanted to retake land from the Turks. The greatest economic case of the Crusades was trade. The result of the Crusades was the Crusader states. These became centers of Christianity and trade. Disease spread with the trade, causing the Black Death. The Vikings traded from northern Europe in France, Russia, Iceland, and Greenland. Mongols were in southern and western Asia. Then Arabs went across North Africa and into Spain. The Tang and Song dynasties in China were considered the golden ages of Chinese history. The Tang dynasty, which came before the Song, followed the Sui dynasty and featured many great accomplishments culturally, economically, and politically. One of the Tang dynasty's cultural achievements was the continuation of the construction of the Great Wall of China. They also continued their practice of the Confucian system of civil service exams. The government also reflected their culture at the time through the official rejection of Buddhism. Another reflection of the Tang dynasty's culture was shown through art, mainly in the form of various types of ceramics and porcelain. During the Tang dynasty, the Chinese Empire flourished economically by selling their ceramics along the Silk Road. Because of this advantage, the empire was able to expand along the Silk Road into the Tarim Basin using military power, diplomacy, and trade. Their economy also benefited from the taxes they collected, whose rates were determined by a census. The Tang dynasty also improved their economy by inventing block printing, gunpowder, medicine, the compass, and ship construction. Although the people were originally ruled by emperors, their leadership developed into a complex bureaucracy. Although most things stayed the same from the Tang dynasty to the Song dynasty, like the South China Sea and the Silk Road trading routes, new changes did occur. For example, the development of Neo-Confucianism showed cultural blending, and women's fashion of foot binding showed the status reduction of women. The Tang and Song dynasties were also well known for their sinification of Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. Traveling Korean scholars brought Confucianism and Buddhism, writing, fashion, architecture, technology, and ideas from China. In exchange, the Chinese requested regular payments from the Koreans. The Tang dynasty influenced Japanese culture through the adoption of bureaucracy, writing, Confucianism, and Buddhism. Japan also had an emperor, but the real power shifted to the shogun, especially military power. Along with the Tang dynasty came its invasion of Vietnam. This was generally considered unsuccessful since the Vietnamese rejected Chinese culture, especially the aspect of male dominance that accompanied Confucianism. However, the Tang Empire was able to benefit from the interaction by gaining an improved type of rice. The Song dynasty was ended by the invasion of the Mongols, led by Genghis Khan in the early 1200s, and was changed into the Yuan dynasty by Kublai Khan. The Mongols encouraged foreign Arab Muslims to govern, but later the empire divided into regional khanates all over Eastern Europe and Asia. Thanks to the Mongols, the Silk Road trade flourished and freedom of religion was allowed. The Yuan dynasty was not, however, beneficial to the economy. Not only were cities eliminated, but Black Death also made China's population drop to half of its former amount, greatly affecting the rest of Central Asia's population too. All of this led to the Mongol Khanates being overthrown. Ghana, Songhai, and Mali developed large trade and education centers like in Timbuktu. In areas like Ethiopia and Egypt, Christianity was the dominant religion. However, when Islam arrived in Africa, fewer and fewer countries like Ethiopia remained Christian, carving churches out of rock to symbolize their devotion. The other countries where Islam diffused into participated in affairs like the export of coffee, which Muslims valued.